Hello, everybody. Welcome to our chapter 5, consciousness. We usually do this chapter first thing after we cover chapter 1, and we do that kind of stuff out of order because we are working towards the framework midterm project. So we don't necessarily go in chapter order. So don't be confused. This is the next one after chapter 1. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover. Um, when we talk about consciousness as a concept, it really just is definitions, and then we'll talk about the layers of consciousness, especially around sleep, and some altered consciousness. Okay. So, what is consciousness? It really has a very basic definition of the awareness of yourself and your environment. And that seems very simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds. It is unique to you, which is the definition of subjective. It's selective, which means that you attend more carefully to some stimuli than others. This serves a really important purpose because if it wasn't selective, you wouldn't be able to tune anything out, and everything would come in with sort of the same level of intensity, which you can imagine might be problematic. So, it's usually divided, so this can be a problem or maybe not a problem. We don't ever really have our attention only on one thing. We're always aware of some background level of stuff going on, but the degree to which it's divided can vary. If you take this to an extreme, it can be very disruptive, but in general, it's normal. And your consciousness has two qualities, which is that it has a stream, which is the flow of thoughts and sensations and emotions. It doesn't really stop. And it has levels, which we didn't always understand, but we do understand now that there are levels to your consciousness, how aware you are of yourself and your environment. So there's certainly been um, there's lots and lots of examples of the levels of consciousness. I think the most obvious is dreaming, where we think about, well, like our subconscious, what comes out when we dream, and we'll talk about dreams more when we get there, but really it's more complex than that. So we certainly have levels to our consciousness that are waking. For example, we can do this thing called dissociation, and dissociation is a process of being awake and aware, but we're not really attending to what's going on around us. And, if you've ever gotten in the car to drive to one place and ended up going somewhere else entirely, this can happen most often when, like, you've just moved or something like that and you drive to the old place. Um, you know, you are conscious in the sense that, you're paying attention to the road, you're paying attention to what you're doing while you're driving, but you're not active in that process, if that makes sense. And you just sort of end up somewhere because you're on what we like to call automatic pilot, but it is really just a level of consciousness that is not its most active. So, it's just an aspect of consciousness that's really interesting to explore. Okay, so consciousness has survival advantages because it allows us to plan for the future and to categorize and understand emotions. Well, so if you think about this, the question really becomes, are these unique to humans? And can other living things do them, right? So the question becomes then, are humans the only ones who are conscious, right? So once you start to unravel these questions, they become quite complicated, in the sense that, for example, what about small children? So small children are certainly human. I don't think anybody would argue that they're not, but can they do these things? Not necessarily. Um, Certainly not by definition before a certain age. And then what about severely developmentally disabled adults? Like, that not all of them can do this stuff either, but they are also human. So, when we talk about, whether consciousness is a required characteristic for being human or being sentient, we have to think through all the variations involved in that question. And it is very much a philosophical question. These are questions that you can easily find yourself pondering when you do a philosophy class. So, that's deeper in scope than what we have the ability to do today, but it is absolutely worth thinking about. What about AI? Right? So AI, I don't think anybody would claim that AI is human, but is it conscious, right? It certainly can plan for the future. And if you give it a input describing emotions, I bet that it would be able to categorize and understand them. So does that make AI conscious? I don't think so, right? I think there is an aspect to it that involves mm, independent thought, perhaps. But I do think that this is a very tricky question, and we're really grappling with this issue right now when we're thinking about relationships with AI, and chatbots in general. We're not very far away from having AI conversations that feel very real to us. I think an argument can be made that a lot of people are already doing that. And um, does that make them conscious that they can do these things? Because this is a sort of the standard definition for consciousness. I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately. Okay, so let's talk about sleep. What is sleep? So sleep is the original altered state of consciousness, right? So we all do this. It's part of it's part of survival. When we sleep, we have minimal physical movement. We have minimal responsiveness. There are stages which are described in your book that I will not go into great detail here. We will mostly talking about REM sleep today, which is the active sleep, and the sleep on neurons. So what that entails. Just because the other stages are covered and I did not want to make your lecture too long. Okay, so why why do we sleep? There's a few different theories. This is one of them. The restorative theory of sleep highlights that sleep is really crucial for the body's recovery. So both physically and mentally, sleep allows our bodies to regenerate cells and to allow us to also mentally rest. The core functions of that cellular and neural repair, right? I think we understand that if we don't get sleep or we don't get enough sleep, that our bodies show that impact, right? And the growth hormone production is really important to discuss, especially when we're talking about children, right? So we literally grow when we sleep. So children who do not get enough sleep are not able to grow as much. And we're also not able to heal ourselves as well when we're not sleeping. We do most of that stuff while we are asleep. There is an energy conservation portion of it. Sleep reduces our metabolic rate, which allows us to build up energy stores, right? And anybody who has had the experience of not getting enough sleep for a while and then getting sick in sort of a predictable pattern understands that for our immune system to respond in a effective way, we really do need to be getting as much sleep as we physically need. Okay, here's another theory of sleep is that it has evolved as a survival mechanism, right? It helps us conserve energy and stay safe at night, which is when we're most vulnerable, right? So when we sleep, it's at a time where it would be not as efficient, so we would not be able to hunt and gather, as easily because we're not really evolved to do that at night. And it's not as safe for us to be out at night for the same reason. We have not evolved to be out at night very much. Um, so the idea is that if we sleep at night, we're conserving our energy, we're avoiding predators. Oops, just to go back. I do think that these theories are not mutually exclusive, right? Like I think both of these things are true, but that it's mainly about the first part of it, this slide, about being able to maintain our bodies and less about the evolutionary advantages of sleeping at night. Because really, we could have evolved to sleep during the day, right? We are diurnal, which means that we're awake during the day, but we could have evolved to be nocturnal, right? Was so awake at night, but that's not how we evolved. So, I think it is more the first, but it's a little bit of both. Okay, so common sleep disorders. Um, you know, the most of the sleep disorders occur during the REM stage of sleep. This is when we are dreaming, right? And a number of them have something to do with the breakdown between n- uh, n- the function of the brain that stops our body from moving and dreaming, right? So sleepwalking is essentially, like acting out your dreams. Um and so you basically get up and walk around. If you're interested in this topic, Mike Birbiglia, sorry, has some very interesting work. He's a comedian, has some very interesting work about sleepwalking. And it's pretty funny, but it's also he has a very, very severe sleep disorder in this area. So while it is funny, it is also, quite scary. He actually like jumped through a window at one point and like so it's not these are not jokes, right? Like the some of this stuff is actually quite unsafe. Narcolepsy comes to mind. So in the most severe form, narcolepsy, folks with narcolepsy will just fall asleep without warning. Obviously they can't drive, right? It poses a pretty serious safety risk. A sleep paralysis, a really scary one, where basically you're awake but you cannot move, and which is sort of the opposite of sleepwalking. You have woken up but you can't activate your body. And then jet lag isn't exactly a sleep disorder, but we're going to talk about that more on a different slide. It's basically where you have moved time zones and the new time zone doesn't match the time zone that you came from, and so your body is trying to catch up, and it can be really problematic and cause some really big issues for you, but there are some tricks. So there are a lot of sleep disorders. Sleep apnea isn't on here because it's not exactly a sleep disorder. It's more of a it is it is a sleep disorder, but the impacts of sleep apnea go far beyond sleep. So we're not going to touch on that today, but it certainly is something that has a major impact on those folks who are living with it. So if you're living with sleep apnea, my advice to you is get it treated the best that you can. It will change your life because the quality of sleep that you get is very important to the quality of your waking life. Okay, so let's talk about sleep rhythms a little bit. This is otherwise known as the circadian rhythms. It's not circadian rhythm isn't just about sleep. It's about your entire day. But we normally think about it as sleep. So this is what the circadian rhythms look like, and basically the bottom line is that your body is most alert during the day and least alert at night while you're asleep, and your body temperature does the same type of thing. So there's all sorts of hormones that are released at various parts of the day to either wake you up or put you to sleep and all sorts of other things as well, but those are the ones that we're going to talk about. And um, when I said that we were going to talk about jet lag tips, I think that this is a really good place to put this because it really is about adjusting your circadian rhythms, right? It really is about exactly that. That is the issue in jet lag, is that your body has one of these curves, whereas the day-night cycle is completely out of whack for you. So this is where jet lag fits. So here's how you do it. If you can, and I will point out to you that I used to live 8 time zones away and come back to California a regular basis and never managed to do this effectively, but apparently people can do it to gradually adjust your sleep schedule. So before your trips, shift your bedtime closer to the destination's time zone. I think it's probably easier to do this if you can do it by staying up later. But there's also like a upper limit to how much you can do this and still sort of function in the time zone that you're in. So, if we're talking about 2 or 3 hours, I think it would be very easy to do this. But if you're talking about 8 hours, I don't think it's that simple. Hydration is really important to this. Sunlight is really important to this. So, when you get to your new destination, if it's supposed to be night to your body, but it is daytime where they are, go outside. Get the sunlight. It will, help your body understand that you're in a different spot now. Um, don't close the hotel curtains. I know you really want to close the hotel curtains, but you shouldn't, because that light signals to your body to either, send hormones that wake you up or send hormones that put you to sleep. If you close the hotel curtains, you're disrupting that cycle. Use caffeine to your benefit, right? If you have to stay up late in order to get onto the new schedule, you should do that. Don't nap. If you can in any way avoid taking naps, to get onto the new schedule, you should do that, right? If on the flip side, if you're supposed to be asleep when you get there and your body wants to be awake, 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 then if you can take a nap and call it your nighttime rest, then do it, right? Like, but in general, it's better just to stay up until the next time that it is that you're supposed to be asleep. It's very hard on your body to do that, but it will get you onto the correct schedule more easily. Consider melatonin. So, supplementing melatonin can really be helpful. We'll talk about that on the next slide. So melatonin, um, melatonin is just a hormone, right? It's a hormone that your body produces when it is time to start thinking about going to sleep. So when you're getting on towards the evening, your body begins to produce melatonin. It The supplementation of melatonin is really useful for those who are experiencing circadian rhythm disruptions, such as jet lag or shift work, right? So working at night when you're supposed to be asleep according to your body. The job of melatonin is to signal sleep, as I said. So, if you have a sleep onset issue, so you have a little bit of a insomnia problem, in the form of getting to sleep, not in the form of staying asleep, then melatonin might help you. Um, it can really um it can really help for that sleep quality for the folks who really need to sleep during the day or for jet lag. We were talking about on the last slide taking naps. And if you can somehow manage to stay asleep for a while, then all the better for you if that helps you get onto the correct schedule. So, it can really help with that. And, it can jumpstart your ability to get into the time zone that you're in. So, if your body is like, what are you talking about? We're not going to bed. It's noon, but it's, 11 p.m. where you are, then melatonin can really give you a hand here. Okay, so there are some potential side effects. I had to giggle a little bit when I looked this up because the first one on there was drowsiness, and I was like, "Isn't that's not a side effect? That's the feature." Anyway, so headaches, dizziness, vivid dreams, mood changes. I've never heard of that before, but apparently. Um, Melatonin will not create physical dependence. So, in the sense that you do not have to take more and more and more of it to get the same impact. You can't create dependence. Your body will always know how to put itself to sleep, unless you have one of the most severe of all, sleep disorders. Um, However, it can cause some psychological dependence, so that can certainly happen where you start to believe that you can't go to sleep without it. And in the sense that it does help you go to sleep quicker, um, that's an understandable potential. But again, your body does not forget how to produce melatonin, so it really doesn't have a habit forming potential to it, except in that psychological sense. However, do not over supplement, and here's why. It can cause a boomerang effect. So, if you supplement too much melatonin, it can cause you to wake up in the middle of the night, and then you'll have a really hard time getting back to sleep. So, um, don't don't take too much. Start with a small dose, and gradually increase until you find what you need, and then call it a day, right? Like don't take more than that, and don't assume that because you have a larger body size that you need a larger dose. That's not really how that works. So, yeah, start small and take it from there. And I've heard a lot of people complain about supplementing melatonin, that it didn't work for them or it had the reverse impact on them. Most likely those folks took too much, right? Okay. So, what does happen when we force a nocturnal schedule? Right. So, with regard to circadian rhythms, we lose sleep quality, we lose the quality of mood, of cognition, we develop metabolic issues. So, folks who are forced to be awake at night, so usually these are folks who are working at night, often have metabolic issues. So, it's usually that they're having trouble maintaining a healthy weight. Um, but there's so much more to it than that, right? Because, melatonin regulates sleep in the sense that it tells you when it's time to go to sleep, and it is produced in response to darkness or gathering darkness. And staying up So being exposed to artificial light, so overhead light, whatever it is, at night can suppress that melatonin production. That makes it harder to fall asleep during the day. And so you have this like reduced overall sleep quality, right? So, you are really having a hard time falling asleep during the day just in general, right? Because that's not when your body wants to fall asleep, right? But, when you stay up at night and you have the light on, right? You're not producing melatonin really at any point, right? Because you're not producing it at nighttime when you're supposed to because you have the light on. And then during the day, it's not going to be produced anyway, right? So you have this, like, in general, very bad overall sleep quality, and then that's sort of this constant experience of sleep deprivation. So vitamin D deficiencies, right, I think that makes sense because you get vitamin D from the sun. You can supplement, of course, right? And you should if you work at night. But like, it's just important to understand that if you are not going out during the day, you are going to probably need to supplement with vitamin D. And last but not at all least, social and societal issues, right? Like, if you are working at night and everybody else is asleep, you're going to get lonely, right? And so I think that we need to not discount that is a very real impact of this type of schedule, and take measures to maintain social contacts, right? Okay, dream theories. So there's kind of four main dream theories. They are activation synthesis theory, which is it's the brain's attempt to make sense of just random neural activity. So you can't turn your brain off. It has electricity going through it all the time. That's the random neural activity. And then, the brain is doing what it can to synthesize this random activity into a narrative. And so you get a dream. Okay, that's one theory. So, psychoanalytic theory goes completely the other way and basically says that dreams represent our unconscious desires, thoughts, motivations, that it's a window into our unconscious mind and reveals hidden emotions and unresolved conflicts. Okay, that's another idea. And then the offline theory suggests that during sleep, particularly during REM sleep, right? That's the active phase. It's when we are dreaming. The brain consolidates memories and processes information. So, we get a lot of inputs during the day. We form a lot of temporary short-term memories during the day. And this theory basically says that this is the moment where our brain is able to kind of prune out what we don't need and kind of create a Cliff's Notes sort of narrative for what's left. And then to kind of process the day and think through the day without all these random other inputs from the environment around you. And then the last one is the problem solving theory, is that allow individuals to work through real life problems and challenges without the constraints of logic. Okay, so these four theories, I think there's probably a little bit of everything in what dreaming is actually for. I do think that dreams probably involve some aspect of all of these. For those of us who, you know, can can remember that we've gone to sleep, kind of chewing over an issue, something happened during the day or whatever, and then we woke up the next day and we um, could sort of easily touch the solution or could easily think through, an analysis of what happened. I think that combines a few of these different ideas. But also, like, sometimes your brain just goes off in weird directions because, there's electrical activity in there and it just does its thing, right? So I do think that there's some aspect to all of this. Um, for folks who are suppressing thoughts and memories and whatever else. And but it's all sort of still percolating in there. I do think that sometimes it can come out in dreams when you would really rather that it didn't. And you can spend a lot of time when you are awake not thinking about something because you are distracting yourself or whatever else it is that you're doing. But when you're asleep, that unconscious stuff bubbles to the top. So I do think that if we think about our own lived experience of dreaming, that we have all of these experiences. Okay, let's talk about altered consciousness. So, in altered consciousness, I think the first one that we have to cover really is about alcohol. So I have six myths for you about alcohol that we'll talk about. They are not really in any particular order. And so the first one is you can sober up quickly with coffee or cold shower. You can't. So, whereas you might feel less sleepy, they don't do anything to metabolize the alcohol faster. This would be like saying, like, you can have a giant cheeseburger and it will move through your body faster because you have had coffee or taken a cold shower. It just doesn't make any sense. Alcohol is a good way to relieve stress or deal with problems. You might not notice them as much, but and you might be less stressed out, but it will, in the long run, sort of chemically make your stress and anxiety worse. Alcohol is a depressant. So, if you are struggling with depression and the flip side to depression is anxiety, right? It's going to magnify that in the end. So, while it might feel a little bit better in the short term, in the long term, it really is no help. Um, all right, so mixing alcohol with energy drinks helps you stay in control. Oh boy. So this is actually a really dangerous one. This is a good way to end up drinking way, way, way too much. Because as I said, alcohol is a depressant. So in the end, alcohol on its own is going to put you to sleep. It's going to make you tired. You do wake up later actually, but it will bring you down for a while. And when you mix it with energy drinks, you are masking those effects. And so, whereas before you would have fallen asleep or passed out, you're not going to do that. And it causes a much greater risk of drinking too much and causing, alcohol poisoning or worse. Okay. So you can train yourself to handle alcohol better. This is a similar to like it's like saying you can train yourself to handle a cheeseburger better. You can't train your body to do that type of function. That is just not a thing, right? You can build a tolerance, but that doesn't make it safer. It just basically means that you drink more to get the same impact, and that doesn't lead to like better outcomes. Drinking alcohol makes you more social and fun. This is a complicated one because, yeah, it does lower inhibitions, and so it can create a situation where you feel like you're more social and you're making more connections and all of that stuff. Um, Anybody who has ever had too much to drink and then engaged in regrettable behavior understands that that lowered inhibition is very much of a double-edged sword and can really cause some real issues in your life with relationships with other people or just kind of in other ways, right? Especially if, for example, your lowered inhibition involves getting behind the wheel of a car, right? Vomiting will prevent alcohol poisoning. No, this is not true. So, the alcohol is not absorbed in a way that vomiting will really help you that much, unless you do it like immediately. And so it doesn't really help that much. You know, we absorb alcohol really quickly through the lining of our stomach. Actually, you can absorb alcohol through any mucous membrane, but like basically. Um, you know, this is not going to help you that much. So while vomiting might get some out of your stomach, if you are experiencing alcohol related physical impacts, it's probably time to go to the hospital. Okay, so different topic. Um, Stimulants and ADHD, right? So first of all, before we go into anything more specific than this, here's how they work. They increase the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. These are neurotransmitters, right? They're involved in attention, focus, self-regulation, all that stuff. And the effect is that we're correcting imbalances that the person who's living with ADHD has in their brain, right? So, we have some myths on the next slide about this, but understand that the medication is seeking to address a deficiency that is there, right? That we're not adding to these substances in a normal brain. We're supplementing so that the ADHD brain has the normal levels in it. Okay, so here's some harmful myths, right? So first of all, um, there is a myth that stimulants make people with ADHD hyper. They don't. As a matter of fact, if you take a stimulant and it makes you hyper, you probably don't have ADHD. But people who, as we were saying on the last slide, people with ADHD have some underperforming brain regions, right? And these are the ones that really impact focus and self-control. And when we supplement with stimulants, what they're doing is they're, like I said, bringing the brain activity levels up, right? And so um, you're not adding anything additional that wasn't in deficiency, right? So now you're not in excess as long as your dosage is regulated. Um, Also, most are time released. Not all, but most are time released. So, you take the pill at 8 a.m. and it continues to release over time until and I think it's like over 4 or 6 hours or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. But the idea is that we're going for a steady level of assistance in the brain and seeking a balanced state rather than overstimulating. Um, so the the problem about around hey, stimulants will create a substance abuse issue. So I think we have the causality wrong. The stimulants are not the risk factor. The ADHD is the risk factor, right? So, folks who are living with ADHD are very prone to self-medication, right? This is why people with ADHD drink more coffee, right? And so, it's not that the medication is the problem. It's that the attempt to regulate the disorder is the problem. And so the ADHD medications are actually protective against excessive use of substances because they, as previously discussed, don't really cause a high or anything like that because they're time released. Um, you can get a little bump in the same way that you can get a bump from a cup of coffee, but like using them as prescribed doesn't cause addiction. However, there are ways to get around that. And, you know, going going off and sort of doing an interpretive dance with your ADHD medicine and doing things with it that you shouldn't can cause addiction issues, right? Because you can misuse it in a way that was not prescribed that can cause addiction problems. Monitoring matters for that reason, but also because it's easy to sell, right? It's very easy to sell your, Adderall or whatever it is. And so, if you're really interested in preventing the stimulants for ADHD treatment from going um, for being misused, then monitoring is really your way to get there. Okay, so let's now talk about hallucinogens. Um, so LSD, shrooms, marijuana, these are drugs that distort perception and generate sensory images. And it says images, but they're not all visual, right? Like they just generate sensory input without external stimulation. So you can hear things, you can see things, you can whatever the sense is, right? That can happen in a hallucination as well. You can taste things that aren't there, all sorts of stuff. So most people enjoy these and don't really have any ill effects of them. But in general, even if it doesn't go well, it's kind of a brief. However, um, if you are someone at risk for developing schizophrenia, so there are people in your family with schizophrenia already. There's other psychotic disorders, not just schizophrenia. So anything with hallucinations or delusions, those are all psychotic disorders. Or if you have bipolar disorder, um, or if you've ever had any psychotic symptoms at all for any reason, it's really wise to steer clear of hallucinogens. And here's why. So, whereas they're not problematic for most people, for these people who are at risk, they can trigger a serious mental health issue. So, you have a vulnerability in your genetics, right? So you have some genetic predisposition to schizophrenia or psychotic disorder or bipolar disorder. They're all kind of related. And then you add in a trigger. So in this case, you're adding in the hallucinogen, and you end up with a disease. This is the diathesis stress model of disease. And in this case, the trigger is big enough to take that vulnerability and create a disease process out of it. So, whereas hallucinogens in general are not a big deal for most people, if you have that vulnerability, it's wise to avoid them. Okay. Let's talk about inhalants. So these are chemicals whose vapors can be breathed in and produce a mind-altering effect. They um, can produce addiction and psychological effects. So, addiction and psychological effects are two separate things, but they both occur kind of in your mind. And you they can happen really, really fast, right? And in addition, it alters your brain chemistry. So you end up with mood swings, depression, paranoia, all sorts of really negative stuff. And it can happen really, really quickly. Brain damage. So, sort of by definition, if you're breathing in chemicals, you're not breathing in air. And so it can cause oxygen deprivation. And this has all sorts of impacts on your brain, memory problems, impaired cognitive function, other kinds of irreversible brain damage. The brain is has some capacity to repair itself, but it's not like a lizard's tail, you know? So a lot of brain damage that you can cause this way is just what you are now living with. So the organ damage, so there's a lot of toxic stuff in inhalants, and it can really cause some real damage to the organs. especially your liver, and your kidneys, which both try really hard to filter out toxins from your body. And of course, your lungs are the first point of contact. So, the organ damage, is usually, first seen in these areas. So sort of on the behavioral side, the suffocation and accidents. So, you can accidentally suffocate yourself like this. You can cause choking. You can have all sorts of accidents because you're high. And so, the risk to you is quite high of serious injury or death. But also there is an actual sudden sniffing death syndrome, and some inhalants can cause heart failure and sudden death. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be repeated use. Some things can cause this after one instance of use. I actually knew somebody who died this way. So, on his birthday, actually. So I think that it's really important to remember that there really is no safe inhalant use at all. There is no way to do this safely. Um, I think that because there are so many things that you can inhale that are available easily over the counter, a lot of them are cheap. Um, they are exceedingly dangerous. And so you should always say no to inhalants, always. And, if you are using already, you should certainly seek help to stop. And there's good support out there to do that. Okay, so altering consciousness without chemicals, what does that mean? All right, so meditation, right? So meditation is an ancient process, really, of altering our consciousness, but with only using the power of our mind and of our ability to control our body with our mind. So these consist of a variety of mental exercises that alter your normal flow of consciousness. And, it has an evidence base behind it, not all meditation, of course, but meditation in general and certain forms of meditation have an evidence base that shows that it helps with stress, attention, anxiety, depression, all of these things, right? And so the strongest evidence is for mindfulness meditation, and you know, for those of us who are more sciencey in our minds, we can certainly aim ourselves towards these interventions that have the strongest evidence base. But what I would say to you is that you should probably aim yourself towards whatever works for you. If you don't have a sense on that, then definitely start with these. But, you know, people are different, and what works for you might not work for the person sitting next to you. And so you should certainly not give up if you have tried a certain form of meditation and decided that it was not to your liking. So, there are people who do meditations while they're running. There are people who do meditations while seated in a quiet room. There are people who do meditations to fall asleep. There's all sorts of ways that you can do it, and for different purposes. Not all meditations are to help you relax. Some meditations are to increase your performance if you're an athlete. There's lots and lots of reasons to do it and lots of different ways to do it. All right, hypnosis. So hypnosis, um, the characteristics of it are that your attention is focused, that you have heightened suggestibility. So, you're more apt to follow a instruction that you are given. And deep relaxation, right? So, Usually it includes a state of deep relaxation where you've been primed to relax your body. And so you're conscious and aware, but your body is very calm. So you can ask whether hypnosis is real or not, and I think that that's a legitimate question, but the answer is it depends. There are certainly people who are not hypnotizable. And I use that phrase very carefully because when we think about the parlor tricks, right, or the Las Vegas show or whatever it is, we're seeing something specific in our head, and it does not have to be as involved as all of that. So, whereas we might have that expectation in our head, and that expectation is a fairly negative one. If you have fewer expectations in your head, or they're more positive, or they look different, so they look more like, and having a session allows you to more easily quit smoking or whatever that is, right? You're going to have an easier time being hypnotized than somebody who doesn't have that set of beliefs. But that's what the varying susceptibility is, really. It's about personality factors mostly. All right. So, there's a lot of myths around this. You are not going to just do anything that you're told to do while you're hypnotized. That is just not how it works. You have heightened susceptibility, but you're not just going to do anything because at some point, a different level of brain function will kick in. And so you'll just kind of stop, responding to the requests that you're being given. You're not asleep. It is an altered type of consciousness, but you're not asleep. You're aware. You're awake. You're just in a state of deep focus and deep relaxation. This is my favorite. Only weak-minded people can be hypnotized. It's not, first of all, I'm not even sure I know what weak-minded means, but in any case, it doesn't really have anything to do with any one kind of, mental ability or lack thereof, right? It really has more to do with, an ability to relax, really. If you can't relax, you cannot be hypnotized, and everything else comes after that. Okay. So I do have a note for you about the assignment for this module. The sleep tracking assignment takes 5 nights to do, and the podcast, which you can watch it as a video as well, or just listen to it as a podcast, either way is fine. It's 2 hours. So, you have to watch it at the end of your sleep tracking. I mean, you can watch it at the beginning, I guess, but the sleep tracking does not ask you to make any changes. It just asks you to track what you're doing. So, it's fine to listen to it at the beginning, but you're not going to make any changes until afterwards anyway. In any case, it's 2 hours long. So you kind of have to plan for this a little bit in order to get it done on time. So, yeah, that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions or anything like that, well, obviously you can't talk before class, but if you have any questions, I'm here and we can chat. Okay, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.